Good morning. Before we jump into the message this Sunday, I want to mention just a couple of things. Saturday, this coming Saturday, we are hosting a parent talk, a parent seminar during the evening, and dinner is going to be available as well. It's going to be focused on technology. Its impact on us, its impact on our kids, whether they're really young or teenagers or college students, and also its impact on us as adults. And we would love for you to come be a part. If that's of interest of you, especially if you're parenting through this technology season, this technology age, and you're trying to figure out where the boundaries and how do I make decisions about this, and what do I need to know about technology in the current world that we live in. Next Saturday evening, we want you to be here. If you click on the either the QR code or the link in YouVersion, it'll take you to a link tree, and if you click on events, you can get signed up for that. It's going to be an incredibly informative evening for those of us that are trying to parent through this particular season of life. I want to mention some really wonderful news here at our church. Miss Jennifer is going to come out. Miss Jennifer is our children's minister, and we've kind of celebrated this a little bit in the office, but we wanted you to know that tomorrow is Miss Jennifer's 5-year anniversary with Journey. And we are grateful for what she brings to our church. We've opened a whole new wing under Miss Jen's leadership and seen our children's ministry grow over the last several years. Baptized many, many children as a product of her ministry and her serving here and her work here. So we not only wanted to celebrate her today, wanted you to know that so that you can thank her after the service and in the weeks to come. Tell her how much you appreciate her. And of course, since she's been here, she got married to Josh, and they have little Lucy now. And so we've been able to benefit from watching her family grow during this time that she's with us. So 5 years tomorrow. Congratulate her. Would you say thank you one more time to Miss Jennifer? All of us, no doubt, if I questioned you, we probably have different taste when it comes to food seasonings. Some of us are the hot and spicy variety. You know who you are. Some of us are more the mild variety. Some of us like sweet. Some of us like savory. None of us like bland, right? None of us go for bland. Maybe you have your own preferable seasonings that you use at home. I brought some of my favorites right here. Everything from kind of your basics. Like you got to have some basics, like your Lowry's. See, there we go. I knew. God bless you. Yeah, Lowry's. You got a cabinet full of something at your house. It probably has Lowry's somewhere back in there. If you get a close-up look at this bottle, it's been through some stuff, right? It's been through, because it's just always around, just when you need a little something. Some of you may be Tony Checkers, Creole. We're coming up on the comfort food season, so always good to have a little Creole seasoning around. If you're going to branch out, here's another. I actually have 2 different fajita seasonings. So if you're a fajita person, one of them I had to buy because there's a company called Meat Church. And when you're a pastor, you got to buy seasoning from Meat Church. This is Meat Church's fajita seasoning. Happy to share if you want to borrow that. Big Dizzy Pig fan too. Anybody Dizzy fan? You're not living life. Come on, people. This is the Dizzy Pig fajita-ish, which highly recommend. Multiple uses for Dizzy Pig's fajita-ish. Then I have kind of some specialty seasonings. Again, I think this is, no, this is not Dizzy Pig, but it's Far Out Feather Dust. East meets West in a groovy blend of spices and herbs, right? Just the description, you're going to buy that. Just the description, you're going to take that one home. Another Dizzy Pig specialty. This one's called Pineapple Head. If you grill fruit, and why wouldn't you grill fruit? Like apples, peaches, Put them on the grill, sear them just a little bit, get some grill marks. You want to put pineapple head because it has like just a little heat of jalapeno in it, but it also has little sugar crystals that you sprinkle on the fruit. You want to get some of this. This is the best for kind of a sweet seasoning. My go-to, and I don't share this with just anybody, but we're friends, and so I'm going to share this with you. My go-to, like if I'm just going to grab something, it works for pork, it works for chicken, it works for vegetables, it works for everything. Bad Byron's butt rub. If you do not buy it in bulk, it works on everything. Bad Byron's butt rub. No griller should be without this. It is a mainstay. Now, I don't know what's in your spice cabinet, what's in your closet or your spice drawer. We have multiple ones at the house. We all take a little bit different approach. Sometimes you don't even need specialty seasoning. Salt's enough. Salt and pepper. If you have a really good steak, like don't overthink that baby. Don't overthink it and don't overcook it. Salt and pepper, high heat, that's all you need. Sometimes you don't need to get complicated. How many of you salt your food? How many of you salt your food before you taste your food? Yep, there we go. All the high blood pressure people right there. Oh, that's it. We're going to have blood pressure checks in the hallway starting next week. There's an urban legend, and who knows if it was ever true. Names get substituted, and even companies get substituted into this urban legend. One of them you'll see often is Albert Einstein, and the legend goes like this. When Einstein was ready to hire a research assistant and or a professor at the college where he was working, he would take them to dinner, and if they salted their food before they tasted it, he wouldn't hire them. Because to him, the legend goes, to him, they were making an assumption before doing the research, and that's not the kind of person that he wanted. He wanted a little research and then add if it was needed. How many of you would never get hired by Albert Einstein? How many of you don't care that you would never get hired? Yeah, okay. Other people think that salting your food, especially before you taste it, is an insult to the chef. Like they've prepared it in a certain way, and for you just to start putting, so how many of you don't care? I think we know. I think we know who you are. Yeah. Salt seasoning plays a lot of roles in our life, in our culture. We even use the word salt in different ways. If somebody's in a bad mood, if they're angry, if they're a little snippy, we say they're salty. You're a little salty today, a little salty. We also have the phrase, somebody is worth their salt, throwback to when some employees would be paid with salt. They did a good job. They did a full day's work. They're worth the salt that we're going to pay for them. How many of you have a Salt Life shirt or hat? You've been wearing it all summer. There we go. And you're a little sad that the beach season is coming to a close. We have all of these different connotations and meanings for the word salt. Jesus uses this kind of seasoning term in the Sermon on the Mount, and he goes just with salt. I'm convinced if Bad Byron had been around at that time, that would be in the Sermon on the Mount. Bad Byron wasn't around. We're going salt. Jesus talks about how our life is supposed to be seasoning. We're in Matthew chapter 5, very first book of the New Testament, story of Jesus' life, one of the four that we have. Jesus is teaching the Sermon on the Mount. We said last week he starts with what we call the Beatitudes, the blessings. This is how to live a good life. And then he talks about our character. He talks about who we are, things like you should be merciful, and you should be meek, and you should hunger and thirst for righteousness, those sort of character attributes. Then Jesus segues into the influence that you and I are supposed to have. And that's an important progression. Jesus seems to be saying in the way that he's teaching these lessons that right character leads to positive influence. There is an order there. Right character, being a person of integrity, being who God desires for you to be, then gives you influence in the relationships that you're in the world where you exist, right character leads to influence. The challenge is a lot of people want to skip over the right character part and go right to influence. A lot of us want to be influencers. We just don't want to change us. Like, I'm not the first to say it. I don't think it's the first time I've said it here in our church, but too many people want to change the world. They don't want to change themselves. They want to have influence. They just don't want to be the type of person who has influence. Now, one of the reasons you and I are able to influence the world in the way that Jesus is going to talk about is because we're different from the world. We're other than the world. And Jesus gave all of those examples. We're meek. We're merciful. We don't give up when persecuted. We continue to persevere. We are pure in heart. There is a distinction about you and about me that then gives us influence in the world because the world begins to notice that distinction. So after giving us this list of characteristics, how we can live a good life, Jesus goes on in Matthew 5, verse 13, and he says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town or a city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." Two metaphors. You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Let's start with salt. Just like today, in Jesus' day, there were multiple uses and connotations for this word salt. One's the same, and that's just that salt seasons. So salt gives flavor. Salt brings out flavor. We all have different preferences when it comes to seasoning. That's true. None of us want bland food. None of us want a bland life. Jesus said, your life, lived according to the Beatitudes, will begin to season the world around you, begin to season the lives of those around you. In his commentary on Matthew, R.T. France says this: disciples, if they are true to their calling, make the earth a purer and more palatable place. A purer, a more palatable place. I like that image. I like that image that you and I step into a world that is broken in a lot of ways. It's hard in a lot of ways. There are tragedies. We're not denying any of that. The world is hard. The world's systems are broken in a lot of ways. People aren't always great. You and I step into that world and make it more palatable. People are existing in some ways in lives that are sometimes hard to swallow. That it's pretty tough going down. Their experiences weigh on them. Their experiences are confusing, and maybe part of what Jesus is saying in the words of R.T. France is you and I step into these hard places with people and we say, life's still a place where there's hope. Your life, you can still find joy in your life. There is someone who loves you. There is a God that loves you as people are facing struggles and challenges. Jesus said, you're the seasoning in that life that brings out its goodness, that reminds people that there is hope and there is joy and there is a future. All is not lost. Right? We live in a world where a lot of people seem hopeless. A lot of people are angry at this and that, entering into conflicts, thinking the sky is falling, everything's coming apart. And in France's words, you and I get to make this life a little more palatable for people because of the way we live, because of who we are. Paul picks up on this idea in Colossians when he writes, let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. Like when you speak into a conversation, you're going to, anybody ever walked into conversation and the temperature was already up? Like the argument had already started. The discouragement had already set in on that conversation. And Paul says, when you step in there, like bring the salt of grace with you. Bring the season of God's goodness with you. You have the ability to carry that wherever you go. You have the ability to interject that into any conversation, into any situation, because you're different. You see things different. You see from God's perspective. You know who is in control. You know who is working all things for the good of those who know Him and loved Him and are called according to His purpose. You have this other world perspective that you can step into hard places and be the seasoning that it needs. Salt not only seasons, salt preserves. Especially if you think first century, no refrigeration. It would not take food long to rot, would it? It would especially not take meat long to rot. I thought about kind of dragging this out and talk about like rot, the smells and the looks of rot. You don't need that, do you? Like, you got the picture. You want to enjoy lunch in a couple hours, don't you? You don't want to visit that, but you know how quickly and how bad that is. Most of us have had an experience with that. We've left the freezer door open and didn't realize it. We put some groceries in the trunk and forgot that we put some in the trunk until about 4 days later when we couldn't figure out where the smell was coming from in the car. Like you've had many of you an experience with how quickly something rots and begins to smell. Part of Jesus' image is that you and I, as Christ followers, we're to have a preserving and a preventative effect. Preventative effect, that where we are, that rot doesn't settle in. That spiritual decay doesn't settle in. Again, there are people you work with. There are people you are around, and they feel like their life's pretty rotten right now. Now, you've been there. You've been in places in your life where it just felt like things are bad, things are smelly, things are rotten. When Jesus calls us to be salt, He says, look, you're going to step into those hard places, and you're going to be the preservative that reminds people all's not lost. The story's not over. Jesus wins the victory. Jesus is at work, even in this hard situation, in ways that you might see. Look, we do not deny that there are hard things in this world. There are broken places. There are tragedies in this world. We don't just pretend that doesn't exist. No, we come into those places to be a preserving presence, preserving hope and joy and goodness and peace and life. Another connection to salt. Salt represented covenant for God's people. Salt represented the relationship with God. Covenant's not a word we use a whole lot, but the covenant in the Old Testament represented everyone's connection to God. People would bring certain offerings symbolizing that we are connected to God. We are in a relationship with God, and they would bring their worship, they would bring their offerings, they would make a covenant with salt. Salt was sometimes used to make a covenant between individuals, but it was also used to represent our covenant with God. A couple of examples. Leviticus chapter 2, verse 13. Season all your grain offerings with salt. Do not leave the salt of the covenant. That's a phrase that gets used all throughout the Old Testament. Do not leave the salt of the covenant of our God out of grain offerings. Add salt to all your offerings. Don't forget the salt, God says. Salt was this image. I mean, for us, it's for eating. It's for seasoning our food. But the disciples are coming out of an Old Testament Jewish context, and this covenant of salt represented our commitment to God, our relationship to God. Paul would in the New Testament in Romans chapter 12, he would say, "Look, present your whole bodies, present your whole life as an offering to God." Let your whole life be an offering to God, and make sure it has salt in it. Like, add the salt. Borrowing from the Old Testament, add the salt to your life. Be seasoned, be different. Carry grace with you. Carry peace with you. Carry the love of God with you. Numbers 18 says, whatever is set aside from the holy offerings the Israelites present to the Lord, I give to you and your sons and daughters as your personal share. It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord for both you and your offspring. Covenant of salt. Our connection, our relationship to God. You're going to demonstrate that for the world to see. One more, 2 Chronicles. Don't you know that the Lord, the God of Israel, has given the kingship of Israel to David and his descendants forever by a covenant of salt? This imagery represents our connection to God from the Old Testament. So when Jesus says, you're the salt of the earth, He's saying, you are a reflection of your commitment to me. You're a reflection of your relationship to me. You're an offering of salt. You're not just a salt of the earth. You're an offering of salt as you go out and begin to influence the world. And you're not doing it in your own power. It's not up to you just to exert enough effort to have this influence. It sometimes takes discipline to build the characteristics of the Beatitudes in our life. But we're not left to our own efforts in this. We're relying on the fact that we are connected to God. He is at work in us. The presence of Jesus is working in us to give us influence, to help us have the right kind of influence out in the world. See, my ability to influence the world flows out of my relationship with Jesus. That I am connected to God through Christ, this covenant of salt, this relational connection. Because I'm connected to God through Christ and He is at work in me, then I'm able to have influence wherever I go. Then I'm able to speak words of influence, live a life of influence. You are the salt of the earth, He says. You're going to season. You're going to preserve. You're going to be a representative of me and our relationship out to the world. But then He says also, you're the light of the world. You're the light of the world. Light brings clarity. It illuminates in the sense that it brings clarity. Am I the only one that has noticed that restaurants are getting really dark these days? Is it just me? Is it just me? Is it just my age? They're getting really dark. Hard to see. And I get ambiance. I'm a big fan of ambiance. I get romantic. I know we're going to dim the lights. We're going to make it romantic. All for romance. I just can't be romantic and read the menu. I can't do it. It's just us. It's just us. How many of you use your phone flashlight in the restaurant? I see those hands. God bless you. Yeah. That's right. I read somewhere that leaving your phone flashlight on and not knowing it is our generation's version of leaving your blinker on and never turning. We're just walking all around with our flashlight on, sticking in our pocket, shining out. In that moment, I need clarity. I need to know what I'm ordering. I need to be able to see it. That's what light does. Light brings clarity. It helps us see what is true and what is right and what is beautiful and what is lovely. And Jesus says that's what you got to do in this world. You've got to be a light that brings the clarity of what God desires for this world, what God desires for your life and for the lives of the people around you. Your light illuminates what God is trying to do. It doesn't make it fuzzy. It doesn't make it cloudy. It's not supposed to be vague. It's supposed to clearly set forth, this is the God who's changed my life. This is the Christ that I've given my life to and how He wants me to live. It gives clarity. Jesus sends us out into the world to bring the clarity of who God is and how He's changed our lives. And to help us have a sense of safety and security in that light. Ever tried to manage your way through a dark room, dark hallway, dark alley? And that feeling of dread that you have? Even if you've been in that room 100 times before, it's different in the dark, isn't it? Because you don't know what's on the floor. You don't know what somebody moved. You haven't been counting how many steps it is from here to that piece of furniture, and you're pretty sure you're going to bang your shin right into that piece of furniture. Husbands, you ever go to bed after your wife goes to bed? And have to navigate the room that you've been in. Right? You've been in 100 times before, but you've got to now navigate a dark room that you can't see in, and you know you better not turn that light on. It's different. It's different when it's in the dark. Have you ever had this experience? You were doing that and you couldn't find the light, and you're navigating your way through the dark space, and then somebody finds the light and turns it on. Like sitting there right now, you can feel the feeling, can't you? Like, oh, good. Oh, good. I'm safe. I can see now. And I think some of what Jesus is saying to us, as you go out as light into this world, you're to bring that feeling to people. To bring that sense of God is with you and at work in you, and you're safe. You're secure. There can be peace. There's not fear in the presence of the Lord, and you represent that. You represent that in a world where people are losing their minds today, right? Where there's conflict, where there's panic, and again, big things are happening in the world. We're not denying that. We're not dismissing reality. Big things are happening, but light clarifies God's still in control. Light clarifies. God can still be trusted. You are still safe in His protection. You are still safe in His will and what He's doing. You can trust Him. It gives that clarity. It gives that security that I'm in the light. Paul writes in Philippians 2, do everything without grumbling or arguing so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. That's the character. That's a conform to the image of God. That's the character. Here comes the influence. Then you will shine among them. The rest of the world. You will shine among them like stars in the sky. Some translations say stars in the universe. And as you are growing in relationship to Jesus, as you are committing your life to Jesus, as Jesus is first and above all in your life, you're going to step into the world that has plenty of darkness, and they're going to see something different. You're going to shine like stars in the universe, not because of you, but because of the light you're connected to. You see, we can't be light unless we're connected to the light. You and I can't be individual points of light unless we are connected to the light, Jesus Himself. That's not to say that unbelievers can't do good things in the world. Sure, unbelievers can do good things. The distinct representation of Christ in this world, you got to be connected to Christ before you can be that. You got to be in relationship with Christ before you can represent Christ to the world. And notice what Jesus said. Verse 16. Let your light shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The objective, ultimately, is not just that they see your light, but when they see your light, they know where it came from. They know it's an otherworldly light. They know it's not in your nature to be this light. They recognize this is coming from a deep spiritual commitment in their life. Let others see your light. See your good deeds, it says. And they'll glorify God. They'll recognize there's more going on here than just what you are able to produce. Now, I've said these phrases multiple times. I want to emphasize a different word. Jesus says to his disciples, you are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. If you were here last week, you know this is at the beginning of Jesus' ministry this is taking place. His disciples have not learned a whole lot yet. They're going to make a whole bunch of mistakes the rest of the next 3 years. They don't have their theology nailed down yet. They don't even understand the whole plan that Jesus is putting in place. They don't understand the end goal. There's a whole lot they don't know at the beginning of this ministry. But Jesus does not say, you will be the salt of the earth one day. He does not say, you know, you could be. You could be. I got hope in you. I think you could do it. You might be the salt of the earth. Someday you're going to be the light of the world. Jesus looks at his disciples who don't have a whole lot of training. They're going to make a whole lot of mistakes. And Jesus said, right now, you are the salt of the earth. Before you learn anything else, before you grow anymore, before you understand anymore, you are right now the light of the world. And what Jesus is trying to draw out of them, what Jesus is trying to convince them of in this moment is they need to be who they already are. You need to be who you already are. You already are the salt of the earth if you put your faith in Christ and been brought into relationship with God. If you've put your trust in the fact that Christ is the Messiah who lived and died and rose again. You're not going to be salt one day. You're salt right now. So be it. Live it. Don't shrink back. Jesus uses this interesting analogy where he says, what happens if salt loses its saltiness? The reality is salt can't lose its saltiness. Salt is one of the most stable compounds there is. It's going to be salty. So he gives this unrealistic example to say, look, don't do that. You can't do that. Be who you already are. Live out wherever you live, wherever you work, wherever you go to school, wherever your relationships are. Be who you already are in Christ. You're already distinct. No, you don't know everything. None of us know everything. Yes, you're going to still make some mistakes. We're all going to still make some mistakes. You don't know everything you want to know even. You are already salt. The Spirit of God in Christ already lives inside of you. Don't hold back. Stop hiding that. He uses that analogy with the light. Nobody lights a candle and then covers it up. There's no way a city on a hill can be hidden. It can't be. You already are the light. Shine. Shine in a world that needs it. A world that sometimes doesn't know it needs it. A world that honestly sometimes doesn't want it. Be the light you already are. Be the salt you already are. A couple last thoughts. Salt and light are most needed in unsalted and dark places. That's where it's needed. We don't necessarily need more salt where there's already salt. I know some of you do. Some of you don't get tired of salt. Most of us who don't have cardiovascular disease, most of us, we don't need more if it's already there. I mean, the whole effectiveness of salt and light is going where salt is needed and where light is needed. We are gathered here today, and we need this time for all of us salty people to get together. I mean, we need this time of encouragement where we worship God, where we're a covenant of salt. We offer worship to God. We need this time to come together. But where your salt is most needed is wherever you're going to go tomorrow. Where your light is most needed is whoever you're going to have a conversation with tomorrow that maybe has some darkness in their life. Our goal is not to get as much salt together as we can get, or as much light together as we can get. Our goal is to release salt and light into unsalted and dark places that need witness and example of who Jesus is. We can't hide ourselves away. And listen, don't underestimate the influence you can have when Christ is in you. Don't underestimate. Don't say, well, that's for somebody else. I don't think I know how to answer everybody's questions. I don't know if I know what to say. Jesus said to 12 mostly uneducated disciples who knew very little about what Jesus was trying to proclaim and trying to do, Jesus said, right now, go be salt. Go be light. You are the salt of the earth. Don't underestimate what the Spirit of God can do in you if you're just willing. If you're just willing to take your salt and your light because you're connected to God in Jesus and live it out. Monday to Saturday. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. Be who God has already made you to be. God, we thank you for Jesus' challenging words. For we live in a world that needs the seasoning of grace, needs the light of your presence, needs the clarity of what is true and what is beautiful and what is lovely and what is hopeful and what is joyful. And may we, when we speak this week, when we enter into rooms, may we bring salt and light, the preserving, flavorful grace of you, the clarifying, secure light of your presence. Help us not to hide it. Help us not to cover it up. Help us not to withdraw. But seasoned with grace to be your people. To unashamedly live for Christ, with Christ, knowing that we live because of Christ and what He has done in our lives. I pray it in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand and worship.